Do you want to load up?
This time is not correct.
Oh, that time's not correct. Working on British time.
Well, not really.
What time is it?
It's just 10 minutes behind.
No, what's it? Oh, it's just 10 minutes. 10 minutes late. Down the right-hand side, I think. Is it in the front? Great. I don't need to help you do this.
No.
Put something together from all your web pages.
on my webpage.
Yeah, I found different bits and pieces. In the end, they all match. I think we have to evaluate the eadh. I was very worried about this day, but it's a very good thing.
Good, isn't it?
And I'm looking forward to having it in
To doing it next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But obviously
We have to share some ideas about how to
But
make it even better.
The Spanish community is also very vibrant, and that was
Very nice.
very good over these last days. It was really this energy everywhere and these sparkles in the air all the time. I love
Great.
that. Okay, do you think people are back?
Not yet, I think. I don't see. Oh yes, Elena is over there. Leaf is back.
Is Liv? Yeah. I think we can start. Please. I'm very honored and pleased that I have been asked to introduce Carina Carina van Dalen-Oskam to you. I should just have said Carina. Carina studied Dutch linguistics and literary studies at the University of Utrecht, and in 1997 she gained her PhD from Leiden University with a thesis, that's another challenge, studies over Jacob van Merlan's Rimbibel. She will pronounce it for you afterwards. From 1988 to 2001, She worked at the Institute for Dutch Lexicology in Leiden, and in 2002 she started at the Netherlands Institute for Scientific Information Services as head of the Department of Dutch Linguistics and Literary Studies and as a senior researcher. Since June 2005, she has been working at Huygens, where she started as a research leader of the Department of ICT and Texts. She has been head of the Department of Literary Studies, Textual Scholarship since July 2011. Her research focuses on computational literary studies, and she is engaged in the development of methods and techniques for the stylistic analysis of primary literary texts. For this, both Middle Dutch literary texts and modern Dutch and English novels are part of her research corpus. Her aim is, and I find that very interesting, her aim is to develop comparative methods that can be applied to analyze stylistic differences in text, oeuvres, genres, time periods, and cultures or languages. Since March 2012, she is also professor of computational literary studies at the University of Amsterdam. She has got a very, very long list of publications, and if you go to her website, then you should really do some exploration there. So I will not talk about all these publications, but I want to mention just one more thing. She was a member of the Executive Committee of the European Association for Digital Humanities, eadh, from 2011 until 2014, and she is currently president of eadh. And as president of eadh, she will deliver a keynote address about digital humanities in Europe and beyond, a literary perspective. Karina.
Thank you very much. Is this one working well enough? Okay. So DH in Europe and beyond, a literary perspective. As you heard, I consider myself a scholar in literature, literary studies, and also as a digital humanist, and more as a combination of, well, many things that could have a name, but that's what I like about digital humanities. There are so many things you can combine and change directions in research. I will start with some remarks about the European Association for Digital Humanities and end with some as well, and in between I will tell you more about some of my own projects which are about modern literature at the moment. Liv has already told a little bit about the association this morning, but it never hurts for those who still felt yesterday evening's banquet, for instance, or even were a bit late, to repeat some things. So we're relatively old, you could say. Our first name was Association for Literary and Linguistic Computing, starting in 1973, and only recently we changed our name. We want to bring together research and scholars in digital humanities in Europe and beyond, and connect people, you could say, and help them find each other and develop new projects together. There's an important journal, as Liv has also mentioned, formerly named Literary and Linguistic Computing, now Digital Scholarship in the Humanities. And we have a couple of formal associate organizations at the moment, and we of course hope that the number of associate organizations will keep on growing in the future. You've got the Italian organization, the German language-based organization, and very recently the Nordic organization, Digital Humanities in the North. And we also have a less formal kind of associations. We call them partner organizations, and the first one that has applied for that status is the Digital Humanities Benelux organization, which is a kind of a loose association of people. They do not have a bank account, they are just getting together in turn in the different countries of the Benelux, Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, and they will be loosely affiliated. We will refer our interested partners to each other through our websites, for instance. I show the same picture I leaved it this morning because we were for the last conference in Sydney, Australia, and not everybody made the journey over there. So this is the most complete picture of a committee that we could find. And there's a lot of us with many different backgrounds as to content and to country and to language, which is quite interesting and very a rich experience to find out how in different countries people are dealing with perhaps the same things, perhaps totally different things. I think it's very enriching to be part of that. I've also found out that digital humanities is something different for almost every one of us. And that's why I start with stating a bit more clear what I think, what for me digital humanities is. I see it as pioneering with new methods and new technologies, new techniques, which enables us to explore more data than we could ever explore before, just using our own two eyes and time to read. All this is presenting us with new opportunities to give better answers, firmer answers to questions that we have asked before, but only could get a partial answer to. And all this can lead to new observations, and those can lead to new research questions as well that we never thought of before. And why do we call it digital humanities? Well, perhaps it's a kind of positive discrimination because it's not very well known yet in the mainstream studies. It needs some extra attention. And I hope, of course, that many of the things we are now developing will become part of the toolkit of every humanist there is. But I still think we didn't address that in one of the challenges, that even in 5 years' time there will still be something like digital humanities, but that it will perhaps be the area in which we pioneer with new technologies and new techniques, and that we can share discussions about that, while the application is more into the digital humanities in the traditional sense. So the names will perhaps change, but the whole system, I think, will not change very much. What do I think is computational literary studies? Why do I call it computational? Well, to make use of software to analyze texts. These texts, well, ideally are digitally available, but you all know the problem. The things you really want to analyze are not there yet, and you have to adapt your plans, or you have to do a lot of scanning from your own book shelves to make it possible to analyze what you want to analyze. Often this kind of research has a quantitative part, so there is some counting of data, but not all the times. If you think of digital editing, textual scholarship, that could be an example of a non-quantitative digital humanities discipline. For me, there's a focus on analyzing and comparing, and Elizabeth already summarized that from my web pages. I think that is the most interesting and most important thing for me to do. I'm not the only one doing computational literary studies. You perhaps all heard about Matt Jockers, who is doing some great stuff in America. He wrote a book called Macroanalysis that I can really advise you to read. It's very interesting to see what he is doing. There is, for instance, the interesting blog of Ted Underwood, who deals with things like topic modeling and other kinds of interesting methods, and who states very clearly we don't already understand the broad outlines of literary history. In other words, there is so much still to be researched that, well, don't expect that we have the answer yet to everything. And a quite recent post, October the 3rd, is about dating revolutions in the history of literature and music using computer software. And he gives some nice examples and graphs. So go and have a look at that. It's really interesting. This is a graph that was made by another quite visible blogger in the digital humanities, Scott Weingart. This network is based on all the abstract for the Digital Humanities Lausanne conference in 2014. And what I like about this is that you see some of the key elements of digital humanities so visually. So collaboration is very important. Nobody can do all the things that you have to do if you're in digital humanities. You can't keep up reading all the publications in your own field and learn how to program and keep up with new things in, well, just mention it. It's too much to do on your own. You have to focus on collaboration, because then all of the people involved are really good at what they are for in that project, and then you can really get things going and get onto new questions and new methods. What I also like about this graph is that there's poetry in there. It's just to reassure everybody, digital humanities is not only about technology, it's using it to find poetry, and there's a lot of poetry to find in this. So for me, interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity is very prominent. The collaborative aspect is prominent. For many people, it's very scary. Oh well, some adventure, huh? But it's becoming influential, at least in the Netherlands and some of the other countries around us, very fast. And I think we are at the front of a very big revolution in the coming years. I can see it in the Netherlands, and I can only imagine that that will happen elsewhere as well, or is already happening. I want to give an example of how you can see that influence, and then think from that to how I read more traditional publications with my digital humanist eye. At a certain moment, you start to look different at what you read in any kind of journal. But I found this book recently, Rebecca Wolkowitz, Born Translated. And yes, the title is influenced by Born Digital. This is how she explains her approach. Many novels do not simply appear in translation. They have been written for translation from the start. Adapting a phrase for artworks produced for the computer, Born Digital, I call these novels Born Translated. Like Born Digital literature, which is made on or for the computer, Born Translated literature approaches translation as medium and origin rather than as afterthought. Translation is not secondary or incidental to these works, it is a condition of their production. She gives an analysis of works of, for instance, the South African author Coetzee, of Ishiguro, David Mitchell, China Mieville, the science fiction author, and Jung-Hae Chang, Heavy Industries, who is doing online digital stuff. And things she discusses is how they mix languages in their novels, and how that mix usually is confusing the background of each of those characters in the story. And it kind of shows how fluid personal identity can be, how it is presented by these novelists in their work. And sometimes it's meant to confuse instead of to explain or to be clear. For instance, explicitly stating that a character meets someone who talks in a different language so that is not understood by the main character, and that's made explicit in the text. She provides very interesting analysis, and it's really a delight to read this. But what I notice is that she doesn't use any computational tools yet, but my mind starts crunching for how would I deal with this? What could digital humanities do for this kind of research? So what I would think about then is, well, we do have automatic language recognition that works quite well. So why couldn't we get some digital texts and find out if we can visualize where there's a language difference during the story? And can you kind of visualize the amount of changes or the amount of other languages? And suppose you could look at a very big corpus of novels, could you pick out those that thematize those language mixings? That would be great, that would be perfect. of course, we still have to get that big corpus. And then the next step, of course, is can we see differences in different languages? Is language mixing more used in popular, in modern Danish literature than in modern Italian literature? Or, well, where's the end? We can be busy until we're 200. So those are the things I would really, really want to analyze. I've tried to do something like that by looking at proper names in texts. Named entity recognition, of course, is also in the eyes of the linguistic area a proven technology. But I found that if you apply it for literary research, that it really doesn't do what you expect it to do. So there are some problems in there that we still have to solve, but still you can do quite a lot with them. Names are still relatively easy to automatically detect in a text. And, well, mixing of languages also occurs sometimes in the names of characters in novels. And a very old example is in Tonio Kröger of Thomas Mann, the famous German author, where Tonio is an Italian first name, Kröger is a very traditional German surname, and the fact that this person has these two names shows his being torn between two cultures and two countries. And of course, this happens a lot more in modern novels as well. So that would be another interesting way to zoom in on the language elements in modern literature, I think. But I won't go into my name research. I want to go back to translation. What's it like in the world to be a literary author in a very small language, such as Dutch? If we look at the global market for translation of books of any category, you see that most of the translated books come from English. You see that on the left-hand side, 54 and a bit % of all the books that are registered in the database that I will show now is translated from English. After that, French and German are almost on an equal level. Russian, Italian, Spanish, Swedish, and Japanese are also big enough to get a separate color in this nice pie chart. And there are many, many others that were too small to show separately in this graph. This graph is based on the Index Translationum, or the World Bibliography of Translation, made by the UNESCO on the UNESCO site. And this bibliography has great information to do this kind of visualizations on. And they also have a separate project about literature and translation. So that's really very interesting to have a look at. We used this to calculate the things shown in the pie chart. I'm now zooming in a bit more on my own language, Dutch. So how many books that are published in the Netherlands and Belgium in Dutch are translated from English? Well, 65% and a bit. The big block at that side in Dutch is translated from English. After that come German and French. And then we see Italian, Spanish, Swedish, Russian, Latin, and a bunch of other languages. That's very interesting, of course. This may show a bit where the culture of the Netherlands can be placed in the World Republic of Letters, you could say. It's kind of looking to English as the dominant culture, you could say. But how is it the other way around? In what languages are Dutch books translated? That's my next graph. Well, not into English. German wins. So 32% of the books written, published in Dutch that are translated into German. And only after that is English and French are almost at the same level. And then again, Spanish, Danish, Swedish, Japanese, Czech and Hungarian and Finnish and a bunch of others. So there's an import-export difference. And I think it's very interesting to look at that for every language and see if you can kind of make a big graph in which you can visualize the ties that you see in this kind of things. I want to think a bit more about translation, and especially about literary translation, because that's what interests me most. Which books get selected for translation? Who plays a role in the selection? What kind of criteria are used? And this one's really nice. Are books read before they are selected for translation? The sorry thing is that many of them are never read. Publishers hear about them. They've got their agents, they're scouts, they're looking at they're going to Frankfurt to the Buchmesse, and they hear talk about this great author that has never published anything yet, but the manuscript seems to be there, and they are enthusiastic. They put so much money into it. We'll have to have the translation rights. That's one of the things of how it's dealt with, to find new interesting books to publish. It's not very romantic, is it? Books are translated before they have been read by anyone in the target language. Is this the same in all of the countries? Are there cultural differences in the acquisition of books for translation? That's what interests me. For one of my projects called Beyond the Book, we interviewed several publishers and agents and authors as well, and asked them, well, how do you deal with that? How do you select books for translation? And well, there are many interesting stories they told us. One of them was from a publisher who said, sometimes I get a book, someone indicates a book to me, for instance, about rugby or ice hockey. And then I think, that's not a sport in the Netherlands. It'll never happen. We'll never translate that. You would have to explain so many things. We won't do that. And others say, well, I look at the story, or it has to be able to sell a high number of copies, of course. So economic principles play an important role. And sometimes there are translators who just love a book in the language they translate from, and they just want to do a translation of that, and they offer that to a publisher. So this sounds very, very haphazard, you could say. It seems to me more of a coincidence if a book gets translated than that it's a kind of a reward for it being a good book or an interesting book. Bestsellers, of course, are important, but when a book is a bestseller in one country or one culture, that doesn't automatically mean it will be a bestseller as well in another country. I think publishers tend to disagree, I think, but I don't know. I'd like to check that. But it's very well possible that the most interesting books from a certain area for a certain other area is overlooked because it never gets noticed in this very silly way of how things are going. So here again, I thought, how can we help from a digital humanities perspective? In this project, Beyond the Book, we tried to think of a new way, or of a way, to visualize the level of international readability of works of fiction. And that's a very broad question that we cannot answer anytime soon, but we do have some thoughts on which we can build in further projects. To go back to the proper names, the personal names and place names, could they be kind of an indicator for how local a story is or how global a story is? If the story is all about New York and well-known international place names, is it more interesting for a certain kind of publisher or for certain kinds of readers? Or a book, a Dutch novel that was quite well received, is situated in a very, very local area north of Amsterdam with place names that nobody will know who doesn't live there, but which was translated and which is found interesting, for instance, in China. So you never know what will work, what is interesting. So we thought, can we develop a tool in which you can upload a digital text and then find a way for a publisher? Well, look up for me which of the new novels have very local environments, or give me something that is globally known. And we thought of using Wikipedia as a source. And then we see Wikipedia as a kind of reflection of what the people contributing to Wikipedia think is important in their own culture, in their own country. This is an example of a Dutch Wikipedia page for a small village called Dalem in the south of Holland. And there's a lot of information. So if there is a novel about Dalem, we could link that automatically to Wikipedia. It could give us a score, well, local place name in this novel. Same for characters wearing a very Dutch name. Van der Horst is a very Dutch name, for instance. This is an old guy, not really relevant anymore, but in a modern Dutch novel, a person with the name Van der Horst would get linked to a Dutch Wikipedia page. Also well enough, you would say. But which Wikipedia? You've got them in all kinds of languages, is the next question. On the top left, you see the English Wikipedia, and you see the amount of contributions, edits, from different countries. And most of the contributions to the English Wikipedia are from the US, the UK, and then India, Canada, Australia. And then a lot of other countries contribute. Right next to it, you see the Spanish Wikipedia, with also many contributions from Spanish-speaking countries and other countries, but a bit less countries than to the English Wikipedia. And for the French, France is predominant, and then, well, a very boring graph on the top right, on the bottom right, the Dutch one. Yeah. From the Netherlands and Belgium, and that's and a lot of others, but those are probably all expats or whatever. So there's a different picture. You can see that the English language Wikipedia, in fact, does show a lot of contributions from outside English-speaking countries, which makes it a quite interesting source for this kind of comparisons. So we decided to look at the edits and look at the background of the persons making the edits to see if we could predict the amount of references to local or global cultural elements. And we calculated the edits per country, and we could devise that by looking at the user, if they were registered, and the IP address. We would look at the total amount of edits for all Wikipedias to predict what would be normal for a country, and then make a list for all the links found for every novel. And I'll give you some examples of the results. These are the expected and observed contributions for all the Wikipedias for the most contributing countries. So most contributors were from the US. The expectation is the yellow bar. And so that's based on all of the different language Wikipedias. And so Canada, they must be doing a lot of Wikipedia editing in the winter, I think. And the UK has lots of other things to do, things like that. But of course, we wanted to test this, searching for things for which we pretty well thought we knew what the outcome would have to be. So we thought about ice hockey. I mentioned that one of the publishers told us, ice hockey, a novel about ice hockey, I would never have that translated into Dutch. Well, here you see the results. The horizontal line is the average. If something on the bottom graph is close to the horizontal line in the middle, it was neutral. The amount of edits to the lemma about ice hockey was about as expected based on the total contributions of people from that country to the English Wikipedia. So you see, the first blue one, the US has a larger than expected amount of contributions in edits to the entry about ice hockey. And the UK does other things. India, the third one from the left, doesn't have any interest in ice hockey. But then Canada, they don't edit a lot in the winter, but they also do a lot of ice hockey. Australia, nah. Well, and a lot of other countries don't have that much editors wanting to add something about ice hockey. But then at the end, Sweden does have some contributions. And yes, ice hockey is one of the important sports in Sweden. So that kind of confirmed our idea that this may be a useful approach to measure cultural interest. Well, we tested it a bit more. Does Amsterdam, left top, indeed is more edited in the Netherlands and other Dutch-speaking countries? Yes. London, below that. UK, yes. Well, Paris, Barcelona, same. So that made us a bit more confident that we were on the right track. Sounded interesting. We're still not there yet. We're kind of stuck at the moment, I can tell you, but we also looked at several separate novels. And here you see one from a novel by Harry Mulisch, De Aanslag. I forget the English title, so many languages. The ones around the middle, those are place names mentioned in this novel. And those around the middle, Korea, London, Germany, are close to neutral if you compare them to occurrence of edits in Wikipedia. And the further away from that center, the more either positive or negative the contributions to those entries are. So on the top right you see Amsterdam, that's kind of well known to everybody everywhere, and Haarlem down below there is not very well known. So this could give an impression, this kind of plot for one novel, of how international well known the place names in it are. As a test, we also looked at Boven Is It Still, the twin, the novel in rural North Holland, and looked at which names are translated, because that's another thing that's interesting from a translation point of view. Which names do you leave in Dutch in the English translation? Which do you adapt? Which are well known enough that you only have to adapt the spelling a little bit? That kind of adaptations are also interesting. So can we find a way to visualize that without having to manually code it all the time? Well, that's still not really easy to do, but we're thinking about things like that. But of course, culture is a lot more than names. So these were very interesting experiments, but there are some other things to do first. You want to do the same for other sports, for instance, references to landscape, events, politics, ideas, and much more. We're not there yet, but my idea that is still that it would be great to try to find a way to develop a tool to help publishers find the really interesting books from that amount of unread novels that get sent in to publishers, etc. So we're working on something for that. I want to tell you about one of my other projects, my main project at the moment, and I will try to keep an eye on the time. But if I get started on this, it's really a very nice project called The Riddle of Literary Quality. And what we try to do in that project is find out if there is a correlation between how people think about the level of literariness of a novel and the stylistic features in that novel. And for those of you who are not literary scholars, I have to explain the background a little bit, because there is a big discussion, you could say, between what one of the researchers called the power party and the beauty party. And the power party is all in Bourdieu. Elizabeth, you'll like that. I've been all in Bourdieu this summer. The Power Party says what readers find literary has been decided by the publishers who selected the books for publication and put the stamp on it, this is a literary novel. Critics in newspapers and other journals review those books and say this is a literary novel. And we as readers, well, we can't think for ourselves. They don't say that, but that's kind of the assumption. We just assume that that is literary, and that is our idea of what a literary novel is. The Beauty Party has a totally different approach. They say that when people find a book literary, it's because the book is good. The book is literary. The merit is in the book itself. They also have a different view of what a classic is. Classic novels are those that are so good, so beautiful, that we still read them. It may be clear that I kind of made both parties a bit more extreme than they tend to write about themselves, but it's just to explain what the big opposition is, because they are really opposites, and the Power Party cannot explain certain things that the Beauty Party does, and the other way round. So there's no way in between. So I wondered, can we use the computer to find out if the Beauty Party has some right to say what it says? Because in the Netherlands, at least, the Power Party is still in charge. I would be interested to know if that's the same in other countries, because I think there are different academic developments as well. So when I start talking about this for Dutch audience, this may be very, very confronting, and maybe many of you think, oh well, we knew that, nothing new, nothing to get worried about, but my Dutch audience freaks out. So to analyze that, we decided we had to take a very, very clear position in not wanting to start with these are the novels we think are literary, and these are the novels we think are not literary, and we'll compare them, because then you get out of your research what you've put into it. So how can we get rid of that problem? So we decided to do a big survey of readers and ask them about their opinions about a couple of novels that were recently published. It was called the National Reader Enquiry. We put on that list 400 novels that were most sold and lent in 3 years before the survey was taken. And we wanted to ask them only after their opinions of books that were not older than 5 years by then, because we wanted to prevent that people said, that one, I was allowed to read that for my school exams, so check, that's literary. We included original Dutch novels, but also translated novels. As you saw from the pie chart earlier, well, if you only look at Dutch original novels, you don't have that big a corpus. Well, it's big enough to analyze, that's not the problem, but it's kind of isolating it. Translations are so dominant in the Dutch literary landscape that it's kind of strange to ignore them. And we wanted to have as many opinions about all the books that we could get to make our observations statistically relevant. So that's another reason why we included them on our list of 400. We asked the respondents to rate, to first check which books they had read, and then they could give their opinion about 7 of them, and then 7 more if they wanted, 7 more if they wanted, and some really wanted quite a lot. On a scale of 1, not very literary, or not literary at all, to 7, highly literary, and also for general quality. So 1 was very bad and 7 was very good. So there were 2 continuums, you could say. We also asked them, and in the end that were almost 14,000, we were really very much amazed, after their gender, their age, their level of education, the postal code, so where they live, the number of books they read each year, an indication, And we asked them a couple of statements to find out what kind of reader they were, if they only read on the beach in the holiday, or if they preferred television over reading a book, things like that. And I could talk about many of the results, but I think what's most fun is to share some of the results. And then I'll tell some more about the project. Because what do we see on the top 10 least literary? I always start apologizing for these results, because you may not be able to read the Dutch titles, but you will recognize the authors' names, and perhaps you will also see in a flash that these are all women, the authors. It's really, really bad. And 50 Shades of Grey is number one least literary from the 400 that we asked. And the others, well, as far as I can see now, there's a lot of chick lit on this list, which is also interesting to observe. If you go to the top 10 most literary, there's an English novel at the top, Julian Barnes, The Sense of an Ending. And then a couple of Belgian authors, Mortier and Lanois, and a French one, Houellebecq, Murakami, then a Dutch guy, Van der Heijden, another Dutch one, Stefan Enter, and Bernlef, and then Umberto Eco on number 10. So you see, this is a quite international group as well. But hey, these are only guys. Did you notice? It's really... And by the way, on the right-hand side, N is the amount of respondents that gave their opinion on this book. And next to that is the mean score. So Julian Barnes got a 6.6 on a total of 7. Interesting is that the year before we took our survey, he got, for this book, the Booker Prize. So here the power party is correct, I think. At least I still want to analyze the style of the novel, but there is something there, isn't it? Then the good and bad approach. The top 10 least good. Again, 50 Shades of Grey, number one. And then we've got the Dutch author James Worthy, who wrote a novel with the title James Worthy. And another guy, Clun. And some other women, mainly. But I was already quite happy that there were a couple of men here. Another thing interesting in this list is Suzanne Vermeer, 2 titles by this author. But there's a story behind this. Suzanne Vermeer wrote literary thrillers, but that was not the real name of the author. The real name of the author was Paul Goeke, a man. And unfortunately, a couple of years ago, he died. But someone else followed in his footsteps and published the next Suzanne Vermeer, and he was also a guy. So what's interesting, of course, is how do readers who know or do not know that deal with this novel? How do they rate the novel? So we're right in the middle of an analysis of that gender aspect. I can't tell you the results yet, but it's incredibly interesting to look at that. The top 10 best shows a little bit different list of books from the top 10 best literary books. So that's, again, indicating that for our respondents, the level of literariness is not quite the same as the level of general quality. So we may be measuring 2 different things, which is interesting. So, well, there's not very much to say about this, except that, again, they're only men. We also asked them to rate to explain us why they rated a book as they had rated. So we've got, they did that for one book, so we have almost 14,000 explanations of why of how they motivated their idea. And I'll give you some examples about the novel that was most sold in Lent by Tatjana de Rosnay. Her name was Sarah. I don't know if that's the correct title in English. A couple of respondents said this was a very literary novel, so they scored it very high. And one wrote that it is a book that sets you thinking and that has a historical value as well. And another one wrote that it read very easy and was very catchy. And the funny thing about this statement is that this respondent used the wrong past tense for the verb reading. Many more others thought this book was not very literary, and the reasons they mention are mainly the writing style, that it's too easy. The story is exciting, but the language is very, very boring. I will never reread it. The story is predictable, it's not in balance, and the writing style isn't very special. And the last one is quite unhappy with the main character and how the main character is dealt with. And it's quite an interesting motivation that shows that people are really thinking about what they read. And well, this one is very harsh on this novel. So this gives us another incredibly interesting amount of data, and we are going to use topic modeling on this to find out how important writing style is. Reading these statements, writing style is the main argument that we read, either for a good rating or a bad rating. But then, of course, we want to compare to the actual writing style. And I really have some more interesting results. So, we started late? Okay. If you set the scores on a quadrant system, we had two continuums, from good to bad and from highly literary to lowly literary. On the top left, you see all those books of the 400 that can be placed based on the respondents as in the category literary and bad. Well, big surprise, the publishers did not publish any books of those 400 that were most sold and most lent, that was considered to be not literary and very bad. Well, you can guess what the lonely one in the not literary and bad quadrant is. That's 50 Shades of Grey again. And on the right-hand side, there's an interesting bunch of novels on the literary side and on the not very literary side. So there's where our main research will go to. We also asked people to rate books that they did not read, if they had an opinion about those books. And I've got a graph for that as well. Let's keep this one in mind, and then this one. Those were the opinions about books not read. And almost we've got some in the literary and bad, not very literary and bad quadrant, and a lot more on the lower left quadrant. So what we see here is that people are much harsher on books they did not read than on books they read. Of course, you can say logical because they didn't want to read it, but it's not always logical. What we see until now is that when it's a novel that was published as a literary novel, the readers and the non-readers kind of agree in the rate they give the book. But if it's genre fiction, the ratings of the readers and the not readers are more diverse. So that again speaks for the power party, you could say. So by looking at these opinions, we also get to know more about how things are working in the minds of readers, and well, how this is part of our culture, and it makes you think about how you read yourself as well. I think it's really confronting now and then. The next phase of our project, which we are starting at the moment, is to analyze the style of all these 400 novels and then see if there are correlations with the opinions. We use techniques developed first in authorship attribution and stylometry. We use this. I'll do an experiment. I'll show an experiment with the stylo package for R, and what stylometry has found out that you can often recognize the author of a text based on the patterns in the use of words and their frequencies. So the words with the highest frequencies for each author seem to have a kind of a different pattern. So each author has his or her own rhythm. And although you can perhaps experience that as a reader and say, well, I feel this is kind of more like that author and that is more like that author, but the computer can count and can show that this actually works. So the patterns are too big to see and to point out with the naked eye, but the computer can show them. It works very well for authorship attribution, but we can also use it for other kinds of research. Authorship attribution calls what they are doing an analysis of style. Style is a very traditional word, but we had to adapt the definition of that word to use it in this kind of digital humanities project. So recently, together with two co-authors, I proposed a new definition of the word style to prevent that people would start thinking from a traditional background and immediately when I use the word style for the first time say, that's the wrong word of use of that word, and not listen anymore to anything I would tell afterwards. So I thought we'll have to do something about that. So the new definition of style, which I hope will be adopted by others, is that style is a property of text constituted by an ensemble of formal features which can be observed quantitatively or qualitatively. The quantitative part was excluded until recently in the minds of many scholars. So that's what we hope to change with making the implicit assumptions more visible in this new definition. But what about the style? This is a very small experiment with the 10 most literary and least literary that I showed earlier. And you can see that the Stylo package recognized books by the same author. So on the top right, Mansell, two titles from her cluster together, showing these are novels by the same author. Same for Kinsella, and below, same for Mortier. But do you see that the worst 10 are all on the top of the graph, and the most literary 10 are all on the bottom of the graph? And I think that's amazing. So, do we see literary quality here at the bottom end and trash at the top? No. It's not that easy, but now the fun really begins. I don't think we see quality. We already saw that there was a gender element in here. So why did women authors end up at the lower end of the list and men at the top? That has something to do with how we view literature and conventions of what is a literary author. He tends to be male, probably, and this is one of the ways we can show that with verifiable ways of research. Genre is important as well. I do think, and authorship attribution has shown that authorship is the most strong signal in this kind of analysis, and after that, genre. So probably genre is very influential in that graph that I showed. But then the combination is interesting as well. Is it true that genre fiction written by women tends to be evaluated differently than genre fiction written by men? We're also looking into that. And to come back to translations, what we see, or what I think we see, but we have to check that, is that translations by these 14,000 Dutch respondents tend to be higher rated than Dutch originals. I think that's very frightening. So I want to be sure. So that's something that we are checking as well. And then, of course, it's great that we have so much data to use for this. I think we can be sure that there's power and beauty in this game, that the riddle of literary quality will not be solved soon, but that we do get some more insight into several aspects of what literature is, how it functions in society, and how readers look at that. And of course, the next step is comparing that to how it works in other countries. This is the Dutch situation at this moment. So what we are finding is what are the literary conventions in this time period for the Dutch area. Is that the same everywhere? Can we compare that? And something else that I want to analyze, we looked at the most sold and most lent because we wanted to have as many opinions as possible. But what if we also include postmodern novels that did not sell well, so never ended up in our sample, but where would they end up if we make these kind of analyses? Maybe then the real difference between literary conventions, between the postmodern side and the, well, maybe what we had in the 400 novels was kind of middlebrow. Well, those are next steps that well, pop up for our eyes. There are so many different roads we can follow to further analyze this. So I'll be happy for years and years following up on this project. Where do rediscovered classics appear in the graphs? And where do all those dull classics end up? And this is a quote from something in the Sunday Book Review, where Zoe Heller writes, "My 16-year-old goddaughter tells me that whenever she hears that a book is a classic or a great work, she assumes that it's going to be dull." Yeah, well, maybe the style is so different that it's a lot more difficult to read. And maybe those rediscovered novels have a style that ties in with what is popular now. That would be one of my working hypotheses. So more insight into literature as cultural project, readers in the Republic of Letters, different cultures, different languages, and equal attention, I think, should be given to originals and translation. And you can even wonder if these are not two different categories anymore. Some last words, going back to eadh, really. eadh wants to support this kind of research going across borders, bringing people together and supporting them in all kinds of ways. For instance, giving support for small events, projects, and we also give awards for several kinds of accomplishments, and the most important, I think, is the Bursary Awards and the Paul Fortier Prize, which go to young scholars and for Best Young Scholar paper at the conference. So I would suggest that you keep an eye on all the conferences that will happen. They will grow every year, is our expectation. Sydney had about 500 participants. Sydney in Australia last summer. The year before was Lausanne. The year after, well, let's do this differently. In 2018, we are going to Mexico City. In 2017, we are going to Montreal in Canada. And next year, we are going to Krakow in Poland. And I gladly invite you all to come to Krakow. Thank you.
I think we thank Karina altogether for a wonderful talk, where she was also able to integrate it with the importance of the associations, or the association which can actually help and give support to all these research, or also interesting research projects. And I think this project about the books, I mean, I'm really looking forward what's coming out of it. So open to the floor. I think you will take a few questions. Sure. If they don't close the room, can we have a few questions? Okay, so.
Thank you very much for the talk. I'm just feeling like a kid in a candy store.
Me too.
But I need to choose. The question is related to indirect translations. So translations made through a second language. And in the past, it were really important in Europe. Translations made through Italian or through French. So, and I think they're not taken into consideration. They're not taken into consideration nowadays. What about with those projects?
I think, I'm not sure, but I think that in our corpus of 400 novels there are no translations that were based on other translations. For instance, the translations from Murakami in Japanese 20 years ago were indirect translations, but since he's become quite well known, they have made translations based on the Japanese version. So Dutch readers can choose between, well, the Japanese, of course, but also the English translations of the Dutch translations, and I know many that prefer the English ones, by the way. I don't know why. Can be a cultural thingy as well. But that was not your question, so sorry.
But it was an interesting answer.
How did you get 14,000 respondents to read the books and to get their feedback?
We had the possibility to do quite a lot of public relations. We had a budget. We hired someone to get us all the attention we needed. So she wrote and called and did a lot of things to get attention in newspapers and on the radio. And that yielded a couple of respondents, but the best approach was sending in a link in a mailing list of important organizations in the book business. So the collective organization for propaganda of the Dutch book, which is a special organization, those generated thousands and thousands of respondents.
There was another question here. Leif, was it you?
Quick question, one kind of comment, but it would be interesting to hear your thoughts. So one, how much is the proportion of, especially those English translations, the effect of the boom in the publishing industry? Because I'm aware that despite kind of threats to the contrary, publication, more books are being published now than ever before, and I presume in the US, as you have this kind of explosion of stuff, then there are more books. There's more potential books to translate, and therefore potentially more translations. The second thing was just the striking. It struck me, but the almost complete absence of, say, Chinese and Arabic, and what that may mean for kind of cultural sharing. The fact that we simply don't have translations or any access to that too. A whole range of literatures that we, are very historically lengthy and profound, and there's lots there.
They did not end up in our list of 400 most sold and most lent books. There are a couple that are being published, but they do not get enough attention in the public, in journals, in newspapers, because, well, the hype of the bestseller always overshadows all the other nice titles that appear. So that's one of the other things publishers are worrying about, and actually they came to me to ask if we could help them in selecting, in finding a way how to deal with that kind of thing.
No, you got it. Okay. You have got.
Two questions. The first is, you mentioned someone told that they would not read the book. Is this something that came up in other, in some answers, or it was just one? Because I think it's kind of an interesting criteria for, let's say, styles or whatever. And also another small question: do you think that the fact that 50 Shades of Grey is an erotic novel, does it I don't know, shape? Does it have any effects on the answer? So I don't think, and I don't know if it's a question of genre or.
About the rereading, I have not checked yet how often that is mentioned, but it's interesting if it shows up indeed, that for some types of readers, rereading is an important criterion to find a book good or not so good. And the 50 Shades of Grey is a very special case. We've got all three of the trilogy in our list, and we will have to check that again, but on first glance it seems that most people read the first one and not everybody went on with the second one or the third one, and that the ratings became worse for the second and the third one compared to the first. But here again, power can play a role, because many people will not admit that they have read it, and they will not admit if they thought it was good or literary or whatever. I had two students who did a smaller survey using 50 Shades of Grey and a couple of other novels, and they selected a couple of erotic passages from these novels. They removed the name of the author and they changed the names in the sex scenes, and then they asked several groups of readers to rate them, to rate the style, how literary were these episodes. And from the 4 books that they had episodes from, 50 Shades did still very bad. So that you could see that as a kind of a blind test that could confirm that, okay, people may not be honest about their evaluation, but the style seems to suggest that even if you would want to, it's still not very literary.
Any more questions? Okay. Alice?
You mentioned the fact that some books that in some country are bestseller, in another country cannot be seen as bestseller. This, for example, an anecdote, is the case in Italy of Harry Potter. When Harry Potter in other countries start to be sold a lot, in Italy they say, the major publishing house said, no, because the school system is not familiar with our reader, the Quidditch is not similar to football, so we don't want to translate Harry Potter. And only a very little, small, poor publishing house, that now is not poor and little anymore, decided to publish it with a very complex translation in order to change some name, change the name of the house in order to make this more near to the Italian public, and after they start to have this huge success. But the major publishing house does not publish Harry Potter,
No.
even if in the other country was already a big success.
I think that's a very interesting story, and this kind of things we need to compare between all the countries. In onomastics, in name studies, where I'm also active, Harry Potter is one of the favorites of some of the literary onomasticians, comparing how the names are translated in all different languages. So it's really fun. But thank you for this observation.
Okay. Shall we make this the last question? Jose?
Thank you. I'm amazed about this survey that you did, and of course this data is very useful, but it's also very expensive. So I was thinking about all the ways to measure canon in that they could be more accessible. And I was thinking, I have been thinking about this last month, like I don't know, mentions in Wikipedia or links in Wikipedia or even in corpus linguistic to measure how many times, let's say, Don Quixote comes up. And that's, I don't know, have you tried all the ways that are sorry?
Yes,
Yeah, it costs less, or have you tried anything that?
well,
like
in
that?
my name studies, I have tried to do things like this, but then I found that, for instance, if you would look at intertextual references in modern literature, this kind of references are very, very scarce. So you would have to read quite a lot of novels before you get a list that is statistically interesting. Still, the problem would be if you would do a simpler survey that people give you the answer that they think you want to hear. So the next step is very difficult. I think we wanted to play for sure and dealt with it this way. We can learn some things from this survey. For instance, we want to do the same for Frisian, the Frisian language, but based on our results for Dutch, we can kind of say that, okay, we see that the expected literary novels are indicated by our respondents, so we do not need such a big survey again for Frisian to establish this is probably found literary and that is probably not found literary. But I would not do that for totally different languages. Of course, Frisian is totally different, but the culture is very close to Dutch. But for Sweden or Hungary or whatever, I would not make that assumption because of all the possible cultural differences.
Okay, we thank Karina again. And I think Elena wants to say a few words.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Karina, thank you, Elizabeth, thank you, Liv, thank you, eadh, and thank you, everybody, for this fantastic closing session of the conference and first eadh day, which I hope we will have many after this one. It has been a very, very inspiring day, a very interesting bunch of projects, and a very good at new ideas. Thank you for attending, and I hope to have the occasion of continuing this kind of activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you for organizing it.